Hello, my name is Amanda again, and this is my third video for EDU 581 ESL assessment. In just a few minutes, our ESL teacher Matt is actually going to join us, and we're going to talk about closing the achievement gap. But before he got here, in order to better use his time, I thought that I would go on and start this video, and then I'll piece the two together to make it easier for him. So I wanted to back up a little bit. So the past two videos, Nova and I talked about WIDA, we talked about the WAPT assessment and access, and I wanted to go back and actually just read the WIDA mission statement. So as a part of Kentucky, we are part of WIDA, along with 35 other states, and so I didn't even think about using that word and not knowing whether or not, viewers would actually know what WIDA is. So WIDA, I'm going to read it just here from my paper here. It says, WIDA advances academic language development and academic achievement for linguistically diverse students through high-quality standards, assessments, research, and professional development for educators. So we're really lucky, I think, as Kentucky to have this resource available, because I do think it helps guide our ESL instruction. And then from the previous video, I learned something new about how to flip the camera so you can actually read these. Okay, so the 5 standards of WIDA, we have Standard 1, which is about social and instructional language. Standard 2 is about the language of language arts. Standard 3, the language of mathematics. Standard 4, the language of science. And Standard 5, the language of social studies. Okay, so these are the 5 standards of WIDA. And if you don't have a copy of the book and your state is a part of WIDA, I would highly suggest you getting it or going online and downloading a copy of it. But as you can see, it is color-coded here by grade level. So you've got grades 1, 2, and you can flip through and see grades 6 through 8. And so it's really it's easy to navigate. So let's look at just grades 1 through 2. Instructional language. Okay, so here you can see, not reversed, the different levels that Nova and I were talking about from the access and WAPT scores. So you have level 1 entering, level 2 beginning, level 3 developing, level 4 expanding, level 5 bridging, and then here to reaching once they have tested out. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that, and hopefully this time through it is not a mirror image of it, so that you can take a glance at it and then maybe get yourself a copy if you don't have one. So just in a minute, Matt is going to join me, and we're going to talk about the achievement gap here at our school, and a trend that a lot of schools are probably seeing, and we're going to talk about how we can close that. And for us, our achievement gap really frequently are our Hispanic students who have that social language, but they're lacking the academic language, which is something that ESL students struggle with, and I'm seeing a lot of teachers not understanding that. So when you have a child who is able to converse with their peers and even with you, and yet they continue to score low in different academic areas, you see some frustration and you're not understanding why that's happening. So when I was actually an undergrad with Dr. Carter, this was an image that she showed us, and it's really stuck in my brain, so I hope it does the same for you. So two different types of language that all of us have, but talking about ESLs, the BICS, the basic interpersonal communication skills, and CALP, cognitive academic language skills. Okay, so you've got your social language and your academic language. And this here is an iceberg, and so a lot of times all we see is the social language, that basic interpersonal, you're eating lunch, you're on the playground, you're communicating just fine, whereas all of this underneath is the cognitive, academic, really difficult language that when we're assessing students and they're not understanding and grasping areas, this is what they're struggling with. So we're going to address the achievement gap, and I'm thinking mostly about our Hispanic students and the differences in these two areas and what we can do to help meet those needs. Okay, so see you in a minute. Okay, we are back, and so this is Matt, who I talked about earlier in the video, and he is one of our ESL teachers here at our school. And the great thing about having a team of ESL teachers is that they are here to collaborate and share their resources, their knowledge, and their expertise. Sometimes we just have to ask for it. So he is here, and he's going to help us to know a little bit about what, as classroom teachers, we can do to support ESL students, and we're going to talk about assessments especially. Okay, so we're going to start off by talking about some support systems for ESL students. So the WIDA book that I used just earlier in this video, the beginning section, the resource guide, if you go there, you can check out the sensory supports, the graphic supports, and the interactive supports, and it lists examples. So we're going to ask Matt to talk about just one or two of each of those and how classroom teachers can use it. Okay, Matt.
In the classroom, you can use, let's start with sensory. For example, you can use realia if let's say you're talking about volcanoes. One of my colleagues, Miss Bailey right now, actually brought in a volcanic rock so the kids can hold it in their hands, see what it feels like while they're talking about some of these abstract concepts. Excuse me, graphic supports. More often than not, we end up using graphic organizers because they're a great way to take an abstract topic, to track the information and break it down, and then as well for the students to have later when they go back for review or if they're trying to practice and reinforce what they've learned. Interactive supports, I work mainly in small groups, and when I push into the classroom, I also work in small groups. One of the really cool things that's happened this year at our school is we're using the Kagan structures. And those Kagan structures are designed to include ELL learners of different levels and give them more opportunities to interact with students in the classroom and have teachers feel a little bit of relief if they're putting students who are learning English into these structures that are designed to support their interaction and to give them more of a chance to show what they know.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so again, that's in the resource guide section of your Read a Book, and there are lots more examples and different things that you can look up if you're looking for ways to support ESL students during your classroom instruction. So one main thing that we've talked about in the ESL courses through Georgetown would be creating language objectives for each lesson, because as a teacher, a classroom teacher, whether you're teaching math, social studies, language arts, we all are language teachers, especially to those ESL students who are rapidly gaining English knowledge, but we just need to be more explicit in the way that we think about it and present it. So Matt's going to walk through maybe a way that we can think about making language objectives. And before we started taping, I asked him if your math standard was classifying two-dimensional shapes, how would you break that down and make it a language objective for not only your ESL students, but all of the students in your classroom?
Great. To back up a little bit, at our school in particular, we got what was called SIOP training about 3 years ago. It's a sheltered instruction model, and that model champions including content objectives right next to language objectives. And it's research proven that English learners feel some relief, and it helps reinforce what they're working on with language targets if they can regularly see and be involved in with the language objectives. So, as part of that SIOP model training, homeroom teachers were encouraged to develop language objectives as well as content objectives. The math objectives that Ms. Bruin just mentioned would include, if you're developing a language objectives, 3 basic parts: the language target, the content target, and then the supports that you would use to help your ELL learners. In that particular one, classify would be the language target. And that is academic language that an English learner may not know right off the bat, and it might be something that a teacher would have to explicitly break down. You could break that down in your language objective itself, or you could just assume that clarify was the language target. Next, the content target, 2D shapes, so that the ELL learner understands that along with the language target, they're going to be working on particular content as they're learning in the classroom. And then the supports at the end, did we mention a support in the objective that you're developing?
No, just classified 2D objects.
All right, cool. So supports for this particular language objective might be visual aids, realia, working in a partnership with another student or in a small group, or perhaps even using an interactive program on the computer. So you would include all 3 of those parts in your language objective so that the English learner and the teacher can both stay on target for what they're working on.
And I think that's the main point, is when we think about it before we present our lessons, if we're thinking about that specific language objective, we're going to be more aware of the needs of our students. So very nice job breaking that down. And then lastly, to conclude, we're just going to talk about some different ways to assess English language learners, maybe thinking outside of the box, besides the traditional multiple choice or even essay type questions. So Matt's actually going to tell us about some ways that he uses assessment with his groups.
Working in small groups in half-an-hour blocks, I more often than not do formative rather than summative assessment. So I typically present vocabulary in the beginning of the week, practice in the middle, and then do my formative assessments on Fridays, and I use board games. In today's technological society, kids often do not get a chance to even try board games.
Mm-hmm.
And if you break it down and think about it, board games have a lot of language and social aspects included in them, including pragmatics, turn taking, working in small groups, working towards a goal, working towards individual goals. And I will present the content as questions in my game for review, and it is very fun for the students, and they find quite a bit of engagement. I also like to use some of the technology for formative assessments. One of the ones we recently learned about was Plickers, where kids get a chance to do an instant survey to practice content. We also like to encourage our English learners to be able to develop presentations, to create posters, to I've even had kids do interpretive dance to do their formative assessments. And also at Glendover, we've had opportunities to modify traditional assessments especially for the upper L, 3, 4, and 5 grades, adding more visual components, breaking down abstract concepts using graphic organizers, and presenting simplified language and visual support so that they can show what they know on a traditional assessment.
Very nice. Okay, so thank you so much. I guess just to wrap up then, I would recommend for all classroom teachers to realize that they are language teachers, to think about the supports that they can use to support their ESL students, and just think about the way that's going to impact their whole class, because other students will benefit from it, to plan and think about the language objective, not only the content objective, and then to think outside the box and use authentic assessment and some different assessments than usual. So thanks so much.